Dr. Julie McCallan here with Synergenics Denver. Are you struggling with low energy, lack of focus, weight gain, or poor sleep? My team can help you get your metabolism and hormones balanced and healthy. Call Synergenics today, 720-387-3681, or visit our website at denver.synergenics.com.
Welcome to the Peter Boyle Show. Yes, he does ride in the leathers. That's why Peter Boyle is not here right now. He's up at Sturgis. This is Deborah Flores sitting in for Peter. Really just enjoying the opportunity to be with you this morning. My show is heard every Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. But boy, it's great to be here as the sun is coming up, having lots of coffee, and looking forward to another beautiful Colorado day. You know, in the first hour of this show, we were talking about common sense versus nonsense. And unfortunately, the nonsense seems to outweigh the common sense of what we're seeing in the media. And some of that has to do with policing. And we are going to be having here in this hour, Officer Brandon Tatum is going to be joining us, one of the co-founders of Blexit. But I want to set that up a little bit. And one of the things of nonsense we're seeing is this complete ignoring of the correlation between the defund the police movement and what we're seeing in rising crime in our urban centers. And for instance, let me give you an example here. The D.C. Council, that is the District of Columbia City Council, Town Council, whatever they're called, unanimously voted against giving $11 million more for police as they're asking them to handle the rising crime epidemic. Okay, the circular thinking is they cut $36 million from the police in May. Now there is a crime epidemic, and they're not even willing to put $11 million back in. So there you go. The circular reasoning, they gave $5 million back. But you know what? Our wonderful men and women in uniform deserve not only to be paid for the work that they do, but they deserve our thanks. So I also want to campaign. Make sure you go up and say thank you to any police officer that you see. Boy, yes, are there people who are not having the right intentions in any profession? Certainly. But once again, it's this theme of collectivism that we have been talking about, which is not an American theme. The American ideals are individualism. There are good individuals and bad individuals in any industry or any field, and they should not be collectively judged for being a part of a group, whether it is a part of the group with less melanin in your skin, which are the white people, or more melanin in your skin, or whether you're a police officer, or whether you are a conservative, or whatever it is. This collective judgment is antithetical to everything that our country is found upon. Also, by the way, this innocent until proven guilty, which is the cornerstone of this judicial system we have that was breaking away from centuries of monarchies where the king could just decide that they thought you were bad and there was no presumption of innocence. Well, we have it in our culture. That's why this whole idea of critical race theory that's coming in and saying people are inherently guilty of racism, that is counter to every cornerstone of individual liberty, individual worth, intrinsic value, innocent until proven guilty. Well, moving on to the nonsense in this crime and policing area, you continue this, demoralizing and defunding the police with Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush. Not only is she continuing her fight for defunding the police, but the nonsense is the absolute double standard she has, where she has her own private police, willing to pay six figures for her own private police so she can do the work to eliminate the police for everybody else. Here's a quote in her own words.
I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety net.
Social safety nets. That's what she wants to work on, not the police. So here's a question for you. And producer Bill asked the same question, rightly so. If she has $200,000 to put into her own personal police, how about she does that for the rest of the citizens who she was elected to represent? So the circular thinking, the double standard, we got to call it out. You know, when we were talking to G. Van Fleet, who survived Mao's China, she said her goal is to drag it into the light. We have to look at these things so we can see absolute the hypocrisy and then begin to elect people again who remember that they are representative government. There isn't one set of rules for them and another for the people. Why is this important? Well, here's the common sense. Okay, so that was the nonsense. The nonsense is usually going to be coming from the political elite, the cultural elite, the media elite. The common sense tends to come from the people. And by the way, that's why I love this quote by Thomas Jefferson. He said, the issue today is the same as it has been throughout all history. He was talking of 1776, but it's for us today as well. The issue today is the same as it has been throughout all history, whether man shall be allowed to govern himself or be ruled by a small elite. That is Thomas Jefferson. Well, that's really the question today. Are we going to basically subserve our common sense to the elitist nonsense? And I say, heck no. And I think the rest of the great citizens in this state and in this country, really, it doesn't matter what letter you have in front of your name, what yard sign you had in your yard. Let's return to find that common ground of common sense. And there are many more in that area than the tiny minorities that are trying to divide us. Here's proof of that, by the way. Okay, so we have Representative Congressman Cori Bush calling for defunding the police while she's paying $200,000 and more for her own personal police. Hypocrisy, elitism, etc. Rasmussen says that 63% of likely U.S. voters disagree with her. Not surprising. Probably don't even need to poll that. But 2-1, people do not believe in defunding the police. Here's an even more important statistic. Of those who the defund the police movement say they are speaking for, advocating for, 81% of Black Americans want more or the same amount of policing in their neighborhoods. That's according to Rasmussen. 81%. That's not surprising. Why? Because it doesn't matter what area you live in, what ethnicity you are, what your occupation is, any of those things that they try to use to divide us. What we have in common is the vast majority of Americans and Coloradans just want to live their lives. They want to run their businesses without the fear of them getting burned down or vandalized. They want to raise their children and have the ultimate authority in that area, not be told that they're dissenters or barriers and get out of the way. The vast majority of our fellow citizens want the same thing. That's the common ground of common sense. And it's even more important right here in our own backyard. In Denver, we all know this, crime has skyrocketed. These are the numbers just 1 year from 2019 to 2020. Homicide had the highest number recorded since 1981, a 51% increase. Homicide, violent crime. Aurora is even worse. In the 1 year from 2019 to September 2020, just the first 9 months, and so it actually wasn't even 1 year increase, it was a 9-month increase. Murders were up 72%. 72%. Common sense would tell you that there is a direct correlation between the degrading, the denigrating, and the defunding of the police and this rising crime rate. I mean, dramatic drop in arrests is what we've also seen, down 44.6% from 2019. Why is that? My goodness gracious. If you were in those shoes and you knew that if you went in to a community and actually did your job, you would get in trouble for doing your job. I mean, really, what would happen? And that is what's happening with our police department. So that's the nonsense versus the common sense. But I do believe the common sense is getting louder and louder and louder, and it is what is going to be heard. And by the way, I want to hear from you. What is your common sense today? 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. We're going to continue with a couple more common sense versus nonsense. And I do want to give this kind of humorous one. My Nonsense of the Day award goes to the students of the University of Wisconsin. Now, not long ago, they were calling for, in their bold wokeness, they were calling for the tearing down of the statue of Lincoln. Obviously, forgetting the history that they probably were never taught, which is that Lincoln was the man behind the Emancipation Proclamation, but they wanted to tear it down in the name of wokeness. Well, when that didn't happen, they did not succeed in tearing that statue down. They now turn their eyes to a racist rock that they have successfully removed from the campus. What makes a rock racist, you may ask? Good question. Is it inherently biased? No, it does not have any of those characteristics. They fought to remove this rock, huge boulder, multi-ton boulder, which, by the way, took $50,000 to remove. Because in a 1925 article in the Wisconsin State Journal, 1925, one writer long ago, long forgotten, referred to it because of its dark color using the N-word. Okay, if you have to look that far back to be offended and to be triggered, you have to go back to a 1925 journal article that used the N-word describing a rock, which is not inherently racist, to be offended. You got a lot of time on your hands. That's why this gets my Nonsense of the Day award. You know, here's what is the tragic other side of this. Let's think about the resources that are wasted on this kind of crusade. It's not just the fact that it cost $50,000 to remove this rock. Hey, that could have gone towards a scholarship or perhaps something else that would actually improve the college education right there at the University of Wisconsin. But on top of it, how about the wasted resource of that kind of fervor and passion and energy? We cannot deny that those students showed fervor and passion and energy. In fact, here's what one of the organizers said, one of the students who worked so hard to get rid of this triggering piece of, I don't know, mineral, I guess you call it a large boulder. They said, this moment is about the students past and present that relentlessly advocated for the removal of this racist monument. It wasn't a monument. It was a rock. It wasn't a monument to anything racist. It was simply called something by somebody who just should have known better than to use that word. And it says, now is a moment for all of us BIPOC students to breathe a sigh of relief, to be proud of our endurance, and to begin healing. Okay, I am not mocking in any way the fervor and the passion and the drive. That's to be lauded. But let's pause for a moment. What if all of this fervor and this passion and this drive to right a wrong was directed towards a true wrong? What if that energy was turned for, say, perhaps to the people of Cuba, where I had someone on my show last Sunday who was in Cuba until they were 27 years old and has a direct line, as much communication as can get out of that basically imprisoned island, hearing of the hundreds of people now who have disappeared in the middle of the night. And for those college students at University of Wisconsin, what they should know is the median age of the people standing up on the streets of Cuba that were arrested, many killed because of it, many disappeared, was about 18 years old. They had that passion and purpose. How about if the youth of this country or those who are triggered in this country gain an ounce of perspective and turn that amazing energy and passion that they use to get rid of a racist rock on the University of Wisconsin, and they use it instead to right real wrongs. This was my big calling out of the Women's March when that was happening. It's pretty much faded when it was found out that the founders were very, very anti-Semitic, and that came to light, and a lot of well-meaning women realized that it wasn't about what they thought it was. But when you look at the passion that was put into the Women's March, and by the way, if you're just tuning in, I'm Deborah Flora. My show is heard here Sundays from 1 to 4 p.m., the Deborah Flora Show, very originally named, and I'm sitting in for my colleague Peter Boyles this morning. But let's think about the Women's March, by the way. All of those women marching with great fervor, crying out for some kind of perceived injustice that wasn't really happening. I would ask the women at the Women's March, let me ask you a question. What right don't you have that you are marching for? And they would say, the right to reproductive choice. I'm like, well, you have that. The right to, they kind of ran out after that. The right to not be discriminated against. Well, you have that. What if we turned that passion towards a place where real wrongs were happening? If the Women's March instead turned to, let's say, Iran, where women are still stoned to death if they slip and their ankle is shown on the street. Okay, that's a real rights violation. How about we begin to stand up and have a little ounce of perspective? Okay, that was my little tirade about the Nonsense of the Day award, the University of Wisconsin students spending all of that misdirected passion and sense of outrage towards a large rock that they worked really hard to remove. Okay, let's find some other real injustices happening. If you disagree with me, call in at 303-696-1971. That is 303-696-1971. Continuing with a little bit of this common sense versus nonsense, want to talk about, we were talking earlier about the Olympics that just concluded, and many people were talking about the common sense that biological males, whether or not they have transitioned to being transgenders, while they have the right to live their life however they choose to under our wonderful Constitution that everyone should be grateful for, especially those who believe that they're being marginalized in some way, our Constitution protects their right to live a transgender life if they choose. But we can come together as a complex society and realize where rights butt up against each other, that we can find the common sense solutions. So the Olympics, as we know, Laurel Hubbard was allowed to compete as a female, though having been a biological male for Laurel's entire adult life until not very long ago. Common sense and science, which many people want to use, talks about how even in utero, a baby, if they have a different chromosome or not, if they have the chromosome that will lead for them to be a biological male, douses them with testosterone in utero. That happens again at puberty. Makes sense, right? Common sense. That actually changes the body structure, the brain structure, the muscle fiber, the skeletal system that makes competing in sports very different. Well, we all knew that was common sense. Even Caitlyn Jenner, former Olympic gold medalist who spoke out against this as a transgender individual, spoke out against allowing biological males to compete against females. The Olympic Committee is finally catching up with that common sense. In fact, after the Olympics, which just ended this past weekend, you may not have known it because very few people were watching, the Olympic Committee finally decided that they realized their rules based on testosterone levels, quote, was no longer fully supported by science, unquote. Okay, the common sense of the vast majority of Americans and citizens around the world could have informed them a lot sooner. Now, unfortunately, they're not changing their policy to the full extent of keeping biological males from competing against women, but at least they're changing the levels because they realize that it just didn't make sense. Okay, that was a little common sense. Here's some nonsense. You may have heard Biden signed an executive order demanding half of all vehicles to be electric by 2030. What is the number right now? Because 2030 is right around the bend, 9 years from now. Right now, the level of electric vehicles is a mere 2% of new cars sold. Okay, here's my question. Unless you use the force that is characterized as Xi Van Fleet, the Mao's communist survivor, talked about, at its essence, the difference between a communist system and a free system is freedom versus force. The only way you can have some of these things occur is forcefully. I'd like to know what force President Biden is planning on using to mandate that half of all vehicles are electric by 2030. Because guess what? You can't just write a fiat. You can't just wish that it would happen. That would be like my saying, you know what? I wish that Twinkies were calorie free. Doesn't make it so unless you have some nefarious plan to make that happen. That is something we have to watch out for. And unfortunately, some of the seeds of that are in the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that just got out of the Senate on a party line. Okay, that's a little bit of nonsense. There are some others that we need to talk about. And I think it really comes down to this. When we're talking to our neighbors who maybe had a different yard sign in their front yard at the last election. They maybe they didn't like President Trump's tenor, or maybe they didn't like something else. But I can guarantee you most of them did not vote for what we're seeing happen now. So this is our window of opportunity to talk to them. And we can start with this question. What is the role of government? Is it to play favorites? Is it to pick one industry over another, such as the electric industry versus, other more traditional industries? Is it to tell us what we can eat and drink, like when Mayor Bloomberg long ago began the nanny state in full force and said, you know what, you cannot have that large, big gulp drink that you want to have. That's not the role of the government. Growing up in a military family, and my husband was 82nd Airborne, I remember talking to a soldier that had been on the very front line in Afghanistan, and what he said was, I'm fighting for Americans' rights to be stupid. In other words, it's our right to drink a huge big gulp every single day. Eat as many Twinkies as we want. We do not need the government to tell us that that's not the right thing to do. If that's a big thing that stirs you up in the morning, then start an education campaign. That's what you can do. Okay, we're going to be heading to a break. And we're going to continue with a little bit more of this, because the good news is the common sense is with we the people. And I want to hear, what's the craziest headline you have heard this week, or what is keeping you up at night? I know for myself and a lot of parents, it's what's going on in our schools, but maybe it's something else that you want to bring to the light, because that's really the answer. Drag it into the light, look at it, have a little fun with it, because it disarms that topic, that issue, and then we could talk about what we can do about it. The lines will be open at 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. I'm Deborah Flora on News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the Peter Boyle Show. I am Deborah Flores, sitting in for my colleague this morning. You can hear my show every Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. It sure has been great to be with you this morning. Can't believe we're in the final hour, and we're going to bring it home in a strong way. We shared earlier some statistics that are startling about this crime epidemic in all urban centers, but right here in our own backyard. Just for instance, Denver, homicide is the highest number recorded since 1981. It was a 51% increase from 2019 to 2020. And in Aurora, it's even worse. Murders were up 72% from 2019 to 2021. There is a direct correlation between this crime epidemic in our cities, and the denigrating and defunding of the police. That's why I'm so glad to have with me this morning Officer Brandon Tatum. He's a co-founder of Blexit, former police officer, and author of Beaten Black and Blue, Being a Black Cop in an America Under Siege. Brandon, thank you so much for being with me this morning. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we had an opportunity to talk on my show a couple weeks back, but I'm glad to have you back on again, because some of the inanity of this double standard is happening with, for instance, Congressman Cori Bush, who just said that she should have her own private police department. Basically, she pays $200,000 plus for that, while she does the important work of defunding the police. Can you talk about your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that was completely hypocritical for someone to brag about their own personal security because of the value of their own life, how important their job is and what she's doing for the community, and as if everybody else is insignificant. Because for you to spend $200,000 as one individual, and you have hundreds of thousands of people who need security as well, which taxpayers are allotting, but you want to now say, hey, I deserve protection, but you don't deserve protection, and doing it for the wrong reasons, because she has no reason to feel that the police officers in St. Louis, in the district that she served, are doing a poor job. Because if you look at it, and I looked the numbers up, there's only one unarmed black man shot in 2020, and then the last person that was shot unarmed who was black was in 2015.
Wow. That's
two people over a 6-year span, and you are acting like the department that you serve or that you represent, or your constituency needs to be defunded. I mean, she's a complete hypocrite.
Yeah, and I want to, speaking of the taxpayer money, it does beg the question, where does she get $200,000 for her own personal police force when the taxpayers are paying her salary and she's taking it away from them? And it all stems from this accusation of systemic racism in our police, as though there's this collective just rot at the core of our nation's police forces. And you served as a black individual in the police force. From your perspective, and also from all the research you've done, what about this charge of systemic racism in the police?
I think it's a complete load of crap. I mean, it's systemic. It's like it's a system in place that's doing these things, or it's some subconscious bias by police. It's just not true. The matter of fact is that people don't want to take responsibility for their actions. So if African-American people in this country are committing massive amounts of crime because of fatherlessness and these toxic single moms that are out here destroying these young boys, not all, but some of them who are the ones who are destroying these young boys and raising them to be criminals, they don't want to take responsibility for that. So when they're disproportionately representing and committing crimes and police officers have to address that, they want to blame the police instead of blaming the people and holding them accountable for their actions. I was a cop, and you don't have time to be racist. Now, if you somehow in your mind, deep down in your thoughts, you somehow are racist, nobody would ever know, because it's almost impossible to practice that. And the reason I say that is because you don't get to pick what cause you go to. You don't get to pick who you serve. And every call that you go to and who you serve them with your life. It's rare that you get into shootings like we all hear about. Most of what police officers are doing are service-oriented, people who are getting victimized. You have to come to their aid and respond with your life. And many of these officers are responding in these black communities, and they're doing it with their lives.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And I think, the numbers just don't add up to this claim, because I was sharing earlier in the show the Rasmussen poll that showed that 81% of African-American citizens want the same or more policing in their neighborhoods, not less, because they're just human beings like everyone else that wants their businesses protected. They want their lives protected, their children safe. So does that statistic surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, if I was, ignorant enough to just listen to the media and Cori Bush and some of these other people who have a vested interest to cause division, then yeah, it surprised me. But in reality, after doing the job and understanding, I grew up in these communities, understanding that my mom just wanted us to be able to go to school and be protected and be safe. She didn't want the community to go into crap, because the property value goes down. People move out of the community. Like, it really destroys the neighborhood that in many of these cases, some of these all-black neighborhoods were historic, where a lot of prominent black people live there. There's a lot of history there, and they're just going downhill. When your kid is riding a scooter and gets shot in the head, that's not something that anybody wants. And how do you protect that? The thugs are not doing it. The politicians are not out there doing it. It's the police officers. And people understand that the more that they're out there doing the work while you're asleep, is the better off the community will be.
No, that is so true. And I was sharing some of the statistics, right here in Denver and Aurora, reflecting this crime epidemic in urban centers and cities, which is not surprising, that correlation with what's happening with the police. And do you think that is having an impact, perhaps even in the viewpoint of those who are most victimized by this crime level? Because, for instance, for yourself, the video you posted when you left the Democratic Party and you became a part of Blexit got over 70 million views. Do you see Blexit increasing? Do you see the African-American community beginning to shift as they are further and further victimized by the lawlessness from defunding the police?
I think that at a very small level, I wish that I could get on here and say there's massive amounts of people who are waking up, by the millions. It's just not true. I mean, we look at the voting of this last election, and I feel like the majority of the African-American community is still struggling to see reality for what it is. However, I do think that this rhetoric is waking some people up, because, when you see the hypocrisy, Cori Bush, the arrogance of people like that, where you're like, well, wait a minute, man, we need help too. These police officers are quitting. We're seeing thugs out here robbing people at the gas station, and you spend $100,000, $200,000. She said in the interview she'll spend as much as she want to spend on security, and most of these people don't even make that in a year.
Right.
I mean, they don't even make half of that in a year, and she's blowing all that on security for a period of time, and it's just people are waking up to that and seeing that this rhetoric is causing real issues. And, with that number being 80% of people wanting police, slowly, methodically, I think people are going to wake up to the hypocrisy.
Well, and the hypocrisy is not just isolated to, Congresswoman Bush. I mean, for instance, you have, in Portland, I believe it was the Portland mayor who had, police up and down her street to protect her. Chicago with the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, there's all kinds of hypocrisy going on there. And recently I just saw the headline where after the murder of a policewoman there, that the police actually turned their back to the mayor when I think it was the vigil or the ceremony for that officer. What do you see happening with the police, and where do you think this is heading? I mean, because a lot of police are quitting right now.
Well, it's not going to get any better because they're doubling down, tripling down. Lori Lightfoot, and I'll often call her Dirty Foot because I think that she is just a ridiculous individual because she comes out with this hyperbolic rhetoric against police. I mean, she's saying, we need police reform, and as if police are doing something wrong. Well, she cannot even acknowledge that these people in the community are evil. The two individuals responsible for the death of Officer French, they are evil. There is no social program. There is no coddling, rubbing them on the back, playing them lullabies while you try to speak life to them. These people are devils,
yes,
and they need to be in prison. And Superintendent Brown, which is kind of like the chief of Chicago Police Department, he said every single time he do an interview is that these people need to go to prison. They're out here killing people. They have a criminal record that's long as the Nile River, and they're just victimizing people on a day-to-day basis. These two individuals who killed Officer French, they had a criminal record. They ride around with a stolen gun with expired tags, and they killed a police officer with no. And then if you look at their mom, she came on social media, and I'm going to blast her on the video that I make today. She's on social media saying her kids were afraid, and there's two sides to the story, and they didn't do nothing wrong. And she goes up to the hospital, I need to see my son, and it's toxic single moms destroying these boys. And I don't want to get into a rant over it, but I think that these issues that we see are really affecting our police officers, and that's why they're leaving. They're not proactive, and it's really going to hurt the community, rightfully so.
Yeah, and man, we have got to, in these next few elections, elect people who remember that one of their number one goals of governance is to protect the individual rights of its citizens, starting with their safety. And that is reinforcing support for the police, not defunding the police. And we're seeing this spreading everywhere. And it's just going to increase, as you're saying. By the time the 2022 election comes, it's going to be even worse. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case. But we've got to take action and elect different mayors, different elected officials. You've also been an outspoken critic. And by the way, my guest, Brandon Tatum, Officer Brandon, co-founder of Blexit, author of Beaten Black and Blue, Being a Black Cop in an America Under Siege. And this is Deborah Flora filling in for Peter Boyles. You've been an outspoken critic of Black Lives Matter. Can you tell us why that is?
Well, they don't care about Black lives. I mean, all you got to do is look at the statistical data, look at what they promote on their website, and look at what actions have they taken that have produced results. I mean, you look at the rhetoric, you got three women who are, and I hate to say this, but three lesbian women who are out pushing an agenda. And I don't have a big problem with people being lesbian, but when you look at them articulating that they want to destroy the nuclear family, and they care nothing about the power of having a father in the home. They're kind of like the hypocrisy of what the success is in the Black community and what they need. And then when you look at what they're promoting, kids get shot in the head all day long in Chicago and inner cities, and black-on-black violence to the tune of 6,000-7,000 Black people getting killed every year in violent interactions in the community. And what are they talking about? They go into a police officer who justifiably used force on somebody, and then they raise billions of dollars. And George Floyd's family didn't get a dime. Michael Brown's family didn't get a dime. Breonna Taylor's family didn't get a dime. Yet they used their dead bodies to raise money. And then they're still complaining today. I mean, back when, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when they started all this, what have they significantly improved? Not a doggone thing. That's why they're still complaining today about systemic racism and all of these things, because they have actively done zero to curb any of this. They're just using their platform to raise money to gain power and support political candidates. That's all that they're here for. They care nothing about Black lives.
Yeah, and the only thing they seem to have improved is their own situation, like one of the founders who had, multiple properties, $1 million homes in predominantly white neighborhoods. So the hypocrisy is screaming, and that's why we have to point it out so we can really show the motives behind things. The other thing that gets me is Black Lives Matter is on its website against the nuclear family. And what you were talking about, Brandon, the destruction of the nuclear family in these communities is, I think it was in the mid-'60s, 75% of all African-American homes had a father and a mother. Now it's flipped. It's only 25%. So that is an issue to be addressed. Well, we're going to head to a break, but I so appreciate your being on the show. And I will look for that video you're going to be posting today so I can share it on my Facebook page as well. Thank you. Thanks, Brandon, for being on the show.
And God bless you. Thank you for having me.
God bless you as well. Well, that was my guest, Brandon Tatum, co-founder of Blexit, author of Beaten Black and Blue, Being a Black Cop in an America Under Siege. I will have linked to some of the things that we've talked about on my Facebook page at Deb Flora Show, the Deborah Flora Show. So please go there and you're going to see some of these resources. Hey, we're heading to a break. When we come back, we'll take some callers at 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. 1971. I'm Deborah Flora on News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the show. This is not Peter Boyles. You probably guessed by my voice. I am Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague Peter Boyles. My show is heard every Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m., originally titled The Deborah Flora Show. Hope you join us. We're going to have a great show this weekend, but it's been just a joy to be with you all this morning. From watching the sunrise come up to talking with all you great listeners. And we've had a great conversation. If you missed any of it, by the way, go to 710knus.com. That is 710knus.com, where you can hear the podcast. And we're also opening the lines 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. And we have Ronald joining us on the line. Thanks so much for calling into the show.
How you doing, Miss Flora?
I'm doing great. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. I'm also a black caller.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you could tell by my voice, but that's what I am.
Well, I appreciate your calling in, and would love to hear what you have to say. What's going on?
I think one of the most vulnerable communities in this country is the black community.
Mm-hmm.
Not because the people are black, but because their vulnerability. I mean, they don't have thousands of dollars to protect them,
Yes.
so they have to rely on the police.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the police do their job, the community is protected. And I think it's pretty ridiculous for them to be talking about cutting out the police.
Yes. Well, that's the thing about these crazy policies. They claim it is for a specific group that they are championing, this defund the police movement, saying it's primarily for Black Americans and the inner city communities. However, as you're talking about, Ronald, those are the people that are being damaged the most, which is why it's not surprising that there's a Rasmussen poll that says 81% of African Americans want the same or more policing in their neighborhood, not less, because we all want the same thing. Our kids to be safe, being able to run our businesses and not have our dreams and our life work destroyed by vandalism or stray bullets. So I appreciate your saying that, Ronald, definitely.
And most black communities most black citizens are very law-abiding. They try to obey the law the best that they can.
Yeah.
But you're going to have people in the group that are bad apples.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and that's with any group. I mean, that's the difference of what we've been talking really is a through line for the show. There's the individualism that is what our country is based on, which means individuals are good or bad. It's not collectively that groups are good or bad by race, by occupation for police. So, Ronald, thank you so much for calling in. We're going to be heading out to the end of the show, but I appreciate your making your voice heard. It's a very important message you've been sharing.
All right.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Ronald calling in, just confirming our conversation with Officer Brandon Tatum earlier, where he was talking about, his unique insight, both having been a police officer and being a Black American who is speaking out. He's one of the co-founders of Blexit, and we're talking about how this hypocrisy, saying that you are standing up for a particular community that is at risk, like Representative Cori Bush, and you're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to defund the police for the average citizen, but I'm going to have $200,000 worth of self-police, my own private police force. Time for us to stand up for one another on the common ground of common sense that the vast majority of the citizens in this country share. What unites us is greater than what divides us, but there are political forces at work that only want us to see our differences. That's why I'm so against critical race theory. We don't see each other by our differences, because who we are as human beings is much more similar than immutable characteristics, and we treat each other with that dignity of knowing that we're fellow citizens, we're fellow human beings that want the same thing: raise our families, live in freedom, have our children be safe, have a right to self-determination, whatever our own unique idea of happiness is. That's the rights that we all want. So let's stand together. Let's have those conversations that people don't want us to have with one another. Well, it's been a joy to talk with you today. I am Deborah Flora, host of the Deborah Flora Show, heard here 1 to 4 on Sundays. And I hope you have a great day. I hope happy trails are ahead of you this day, wherever you're driving, wherever you're going. And thanks so much for being a part of the show. It's been an honor to sit in for my colleague, Peter Boyles. Have a great day.